We've got a great number of questions here, really good questions. Apologies for those of you that submitted questions that we're not able to include, but hopefully as we go through, if there are additional questions, there's time, we can of course look to the Q&A panel and hopefully we can ask some of those. We'll see how things go, but the main aim really today is to talk about maps and to explore some of these dimensions to cartography in a bit more detail. And so without further ado, I'm just going to get through to the first question, and I think I'll pose this to Bill first of all. And the question is, what has COVID-19 done for cartography? I think you're muted, Bill. Bill, sorry, I think you're muted.
I'm back.
That's it, thanks.
Okay. I guess what I've found is that in this COVID world, I think maps have become the go-to resource to get either a local view or an international view of what's really happening with COVID. And for example, being able to map the data that comes out of Johns Hopkins. And I think that this has led to an awareness of the public of the power of geographics, that they can actually look through all these tabulated data. But like in my local newspaper, there's that map inserted, it's interactive, you can wade through, you can zoom and so on. But I think actually twofold. One, it informs the general public in a most accessible and understandable way. But I think it's also shown the general public and made them more aware of the power of geographics.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, some good thoughts there. Claire, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I was having a think just there while Bill was talking, and I think it's really helped to emphasise to the general public that all this data is place-based. There's so much, looking back in history over global events that have happened, a lot of the infrastructure graphics shown around it's not always been cartographic, and I think that's been a really good development and helped the scientists to track some of this move when it's been such a global pandemic, obviously, been able to use it place-based and geographic to try and show. I mean, it harps back to the old Jon Snow and I know there's people, one side or another on how that sort of impacted people, but it goes to show how maps can track things and how things can be tracked differently using the place-based data that it uses.
Okay, great. Let's have Alina next then on that issue. What do you think that COVID-19 has done for cartography?
Thank you. I will start. In fact, I'll say that we see better now cartography's purpose, which is to help us understand our place on Earth and how we better interact and in fact the impact we have with the environment. And when we address this question, is not only the COVID, and as soon as COVID started, we all had to work from home, right? Majority, of course, key workers had to still go to their offices or hospitals or their workplace. But we better understand, and we've seen that it became more visible, and the purpose of cartography has been redefined, in fact, to better understand our place on world. And as soon as William mentioned, as soon as the data came in from Johns Hopkins, in fact, all the statistical data were more and more present for everyone to access. And we know there are loads of platforms to access data, geospatial. But we've seen that more people have been engaged into understanding the data and putting them on the map. And I think cartography is now, and the geospatial as well, is now on awareness. The awareness increased for this science.
Okay, so another point about awareness. Yes, very good. Okay, fantastic. So Mark, then over to you, and then I'll hit back with some interesting points maybe.
Sure, Alex. Thanks. Just to be clear, I'm not only representing my day job with Esri, but also the International Map Industry Association. So this is a joint event with the International Map Industry Association and British Cartographic Society, and we appreciate that. So, on behalf of the IMIA, thank you. And I think we've seen within the International Map Industry Association quite a bit of an uptake with COVID-19 for many different applications. But I think the first point, Bill mentioned Johns Hopkins University, and so did Alina. That was it was huge. That we've seen 2 trillion hits with a T on that site. I mean, everyone understands what geospatial information can do now, and it was the marriage of the map information and the statistical information, as Alina said, and the power of putting that together and then putting it into a dashboard that people could quickly and easily understand was incredible. The other part of it was the accessibility of it and the ability to leverage that. Johns Hopkins University had the foresight to make that available, their dashboard available out on GitHub, as well as the information. And we saw that go viral across different countries. Something like 70 different countries created dashboards with their own look and feel, their own languages, similar to Johns Hopkins, but specific to their organizations or their countries. So we often saw, 3 to half dozen different COVID-19 websites in different countries, and then we could link all of those together. So you could go to a site and you could go, a system of systems where you could link those. So I thought that was incredible. We've made this information generically available to everyone, and then we've seen the ease of the use of that information.
Excellent. Yeah, a very good range of answers there. I think in terms of raising awareness, that seems to be a key thing. I suppose the question more is about cartography in general, I suppose, and whether we feel that actually COVID has maybe raised awareness not just of the issue of COVID itself, but of cartography, the importance of good cartography. So perhaps another slight angle on this. Jim Goldsmith has just asked this question that perhaps gets the point of that. What do you think is the most impressive COVID-19 map you've seen, and why? Maybe that you've just actually mentioned what that is, but perhaps if anyone has got anything they can add to that. Alina, maybe should we go to you first?
Thank you. Yes, exactly. That's I will straight on say that the dashboard Esri and the dashboard itself as the platform from Esri created, that's really powerful. So we've used it as well for our water, for our industry here in the UK, on many other applications. But I would like to bring into discussion as well the open data or open platforms, because more people have started to create dashboards or applications from nothing. So just coding, right? So we have the data on GitHub. We have as well loads open platforms, and people from each country have gathered together, communities. And of course, I'm in the UK, but I'm still supporting my community in Romania, where I'm from. And there we have created, I'm not saying to take the credit, but there's definitely the greatest platform in Romania to represent COVID, represent the impact of coronavirus, where the entire governmental bodies, institutions, they didn't want to share the data. So there was a problem on our side that we didn't have the data, and we had to rely on the data published by newspapers, but by every individual county. And teams of volunteers have gathered around this and put their free time into creating a platform from nothing. And we were really pleased. In fact, we published about it on MapLines.
Great.
But
okay,
yeah, I will go back to the dashboard.
Yeah, that's interesting, because again, it's not maybe a sort of aesthetic consideration, but more about the wider participatory element of it, which is, I guess, why you find that impressive. Yeah, great. Okay, perhaps let's go to Mark. I can probably guess what he's going to say, but you may surprise us all.
Well, I think it was the just the plethora of maps that we saw out there, and it wasn't only at the country level, but you went all the way down to state and in some cases county level, which I think was the most informative and actionable information when you can get it down to the to the level that people are familiar with. But you asked what was the most important map. There were so many out there and so many organizations making them, but there were one that stood out, I think, was the Pulse map, which took the the daily infection rates, but created just a symbol, and it was updated daily. But it was a map where you could just quickly look at all the states in the United States, or in some places countries, and you could just see what that pulse was and what it looked like, and it just harken back to our medical community. So I love the symbolization on that map and the simplicity of it. You could quickly understand which states had rises and falls in COVID cases.
Okay, excellent, thanks. Let's go to perhaps Claire next, and then Bill to round that off, and we'll move on to the next question, I think. Yeah, Claire?
Yeah. Well, one unexpected outcome that I found at Steer, working on wayfinding mapping, we actually were approached by it. So we're working for Ottawa, the city of Ottawa at the moment. And one of the unexpected outcomes with our wayfinding was that they were really keen. They realised that, okay, this is a map in the middle of the street that nobody needs to touch. We don't need to hand things. So it was about the transmission of COVID and how they were dealing with their internal tourists now in the city. And so that was quite an unexpected outcome in the workplace, that we were producing these maps for them, and we ran a pilot over the winter in Ottawa there, and the good sort of like revelation that the city of Ottawa tourism found, that they were like, oh, this is great because we can actually put this in the middle of the pandemic safely, obviously, like the manufacturing and everything, and be able to help the tourists that are able to still visit, because obviously they had a huge drop from the international, as all the major cities around the world, everybody has. And so that was something quite different from the cartographic side that we hadn't really thought about, like how people are using maps during the pandemic. And people still need to get around, the ones that could, the ones when the restrictions were lifted. And so that was something that we're taking forward from there.
Yeah, always good to remember that people actually use maps rather than when you just look at them. Yeah, great. Bill, do you want to just round that off then? What's the impressive map of COVID that you've seen?
I think from my perspective, I think the most impressive COVID maps have been those that are inserted into online newspapers. So the maps are interactive, they're built on the real data, say from Johns Hopkins, and for the normal everyday person interested in knowing what's going on, it's there. They don't have to look for it. They're reading a newspaper article, they can click on it, they can zoom in, and they can see what's happening in other countries and so on. So for me, it's that accessibility by the general person in the street of maps that we can now insert into newspapers.
Excellent, thanks. I mean, I'm only going to ask myself this question. I think it's very interesting what you're all perhaps talking about, the maps that are made by organisations and so on. I was quite struck by the maps that were made by individuals about their own experience. Those of you that read the Cartographic Journal will notice there's a fantastic example from France there, Arthur Bobard-Dude, who created a map of his 1 kilometre radius around lockdown. And in a way, that also perhaps gives us a sense that it's not something which is out there, but something very individual. It shapes the way that we obviously engage with our environment now with COVID. That's transformed the way we understand our local space. So perhaps, some of these maps can change the way we look at space in quite a strong way. I wonder if Paul's just suggested that perhaps those of you that panelists that have got particular maps, if you wanted to maybe at some point share those links to those maps, that might be quite useful for the rest of those listening to have a look at. That might be a great idea. But yeah, okay, thanks very much indeed. I think that's excellent roundup. Obviously, there's a huge amount. I think that we often perhaps look at COVID in a negative way, of course, for right reasons. But actually, sometimes this sort of thing can really do quite well for cartography in terms of showing us the importance of geovisualization and doing that effectively. And also perhaps showing us that perhaps sometimes it's not done so effectively as well when maps are made to mislead. So that perhaps then goes on to our next question, which I'm going to give to Alina next, actually, which is, should we trust everything we see on a map? What do you think?
Well, exactly, you touch on the point. Thank you, Alex. You exactly touch on the point of maps being made by those that don't have the skills or don't have the proper training, or maybe let's say proper being university or masters or any course related to this. So how far will we go to trust those? But also is the source of the data. Because in the end, we go towards when we explain, for instance, when I have classes with children across the world now. This morning I had classes in China for map making. One of the key points we present is the data source. So who is the data provider of? If it is you, then you make sure you create a database on trustful source. If you have aerial imagery, if you have GPS, if you go on the field and collect the data, so you have to have that trust. But it comes down to as well the skill of creating the map, but also how the data is there, and then how is represented. Because again, the representation, the visualization might mislead people, or if it's the data put forward for decision making, then if you let's say color or represent the data in a very powerful color, how will that influence? Right? We've seen, especially on the politics side, that's especially on US, the politics side, how the data was represented and was somehow misleading in the end, having the two winners a bit on a challenge there. But that's my point. Comes to source.
Can you be a bit more specific when you say a powerful colour? That's quite an interesting idea. Explain what that might mean.
I will say I'm driven by red, for instance. Personally, if I see red somewhere, I feel like it's danger.
Right, there you go.
So definitely has to be, you have to be mindful when someone creates a map, has to be mindful of what in fact data is represented. Who is the end reader? Who is the end receiver, the user of that map? Mm-hmm. And if I'm going to represent the vegetation outside or an impact of a hazardous area, for instance, we see what's happening in Germany, how we are going to better represent the information there in order to take a good decision. And one of my latest posts on a social media platform was related to the fact that people, for instance, are living in floodplain areas. But because there weren't any floods in the last 1,000 years, they considered that there aren't going to be any floods on the area. In the end, it happened, and we've seen it being very impactful. And how we represent the data, how we make the people that will receive the information more conscious that there is a danger, or how that will influence them. And that will come down to this route of being misleading.
Okay, excellent. Thanks very much. So it's sort of very focused on data quality, perhaps, and what lies at the core
representation
of
and source.
At. Very interesting. And again, the world constantly surprises us. I'm sure I felt some earthquakes in this part of the world where I am, southeast of England this morning. I'll have to check and see if that's absolutely true. If I disappear, you'll know what the reason for that is. But yes, okay, great. Let's go to Mark next then on that. So, should we trust everything we see on a map, Mark? What do you think?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. I appreciate that, and appreciated Alina's answer. I think I'm thinking a little different tact in that I think we always need to question the maps. It has the bias of the cartographer and of the data that's being used. But I think by and large, up until recently, we've been able to, be fairly confident in the maps that we have. We've seen, especially in the last year, this rise of fake maps where people have intentionally and in negative ways purposely tried to skew the maps and use them to lie. Now, this isn't new. There's a book that came out over 40 years ago by Mark Monmonier called How to Lie with Maps. So, this is nothing new, and that came out of How to Lie with Statistics. So we know the data and the maps have this challenge, but typically people by and large have been good stewards of that data and been good stewards of communicating that information. we're actually seeing people use it to try and bias opinions. And so I think we have to be challenged by that. And I think that's where things like the British Cartographic Society, the International Cartographic Society that Bill's been part of, and the International Map Industry Association, International Map Industry Association, the IMIA, come into play, because I think those members, there's a level of trust that people can place in them when they see that. Now, it may not be completely 100%, and it may not be completely founded, but I think you're in the day and age when you're looking for brands that you can trust. That's a place that you can go and have some level of confidence that the information is being communicated in a fairly non-biased way.
Okay, that's really interesting, that whole idea of brands and so on. People look to social media sometimes for news as opposed to going to maybe trusted news outlets and so on. So maybe there's a sort of a parallel there in terms of the information to trust. Okay, great. Okay, let's maybe go to Bill next on that. Bill, do you think we should trust everything we see on a map?
Well, I'd say no. Yeah. And I guess we could think that maybe Donald Trump was commenting on maps when he talked about fake news, linking on to Marx. And I think that if you look at the concept of fake news and maps, there is always somewhere on the map that's fake news that either doesn't exist or has been distorted. So we're living with that. And I think what we have to do as cartographers, I think, is make something that I would call the beautiful lie. That how do we make this thing achievable? And I just thought that term was interesting, because if you look at historically, it once took many years to either prove or to not discover that certain geographical features that were depicted on maps did not exist at all. So now with communications technology, we can check these things. However, in checking these things, I'm aware of the public's poor knowledge of mapping technology, say in the early days of Google Earth, where people looked at an image of their property and their car wasn't in their driveway. So they rang the police and said, look, my car's been stolen, it's not out there. So I guess I'm thinking that there's fake news always somewhere on the map. We as cartographers have to produce this beautiful lie that works. But I think it's becoming easier for the map user now to check whether the data is fake or not.
Very interesting. So if all maps are fake, then I wonder if there's an increased sense of perhaps the user having more vigilance to check. And as you say, making it a little bit easier maybe for users to check what they see on map. That's very interesting. What if they actually do or not? That might be worth looking at. Okay, Claire, what do you think then about this? You make maps for steer Davis Gleave. You're used to making maps that people trust if they need to get to A to B. Do you indulge in fake maps?
Yeah. Well, I was, trying to get my head around if there's really any not maps that we can't trust. The opposite way around. Is there anything that's really, really truthful? I mean, every map, therefore, is a lie, because we're distorting reality to what we're putting down on paper or technology or however we're displaying it. So I think our job as cartographers is to educate people that is the case, and that's fundamentally, I think, what we need to do, and train, make people aware of how to spot something. So it used to be quite easy to spot a fake map from our trained eyes, I think. We'd pull out, the design's not very good, the data must be rubbish, kind of, that kind of look of it. But now, last week I saw a really interesting map doing the rounds on social media of Europe, and it was getting quite a lot of likes and things, and it kind of drew my attention. And I was like, face value, it looks really good. It's a very topographic, detailed map of the whole of Europe. It's got lovely projection. And then I noticed Iceland was upside down. And that kind of, just went, oh, hang on, that's thrown me, kind of thing. And then when I'd actually looked in the detail, they had different footballers' names as town places, and there was loads of details that they'd put Malta on Crete instead. And so that all the the features, there was so much that had been changed and altered, and on face value, even I was like, it's a map of Europe. What's going on with this sort of thing? And so it really training, educating the wider public to delve into that information and really really take on board what they're seeing, not just for face value, but actually interrogating it and judging it against their own knowledge as well. So yeah, I think we need to use our powers for good as professional cartographers.
Interesting. Okay. And of course, it's, I guess, one of those issues that we have to deal with when we're thinking about educating new map users, and obviously those that need to get an ability in terms of navigation as well as map interpretation to be discerning about the data that's shown on a map and whether to trust it or not. Sometimes we're very easily lured into that trust because the power that a map has, perhaps, that unlike anything else, it has that sort of sense of unauthoredness, perhaps, as some people call it. But that perhaps leads quite nicely onto another question about education in cartography. I think, Claire, you were talking about the role, and Bill, also the role of training people perhaps to be a bit more discerning. So another question related to this then is, what role should cartography play in education? And you could look at that at whatever stage of education you'd like, either specifically or more broadly. But what do you think? What role should cartography play in education? Perhaps Mark Segan, I'll go to you first with that one.
Sure. I think it's critical. I think maps help us communicate information at a fundamental level, and it's a way of training up our next generation. Within the International Map Industry Association, we have a number of members that have long, like decades, worked with integrating maps into curriculum and helping really expand the understanding of a particular topic, whether it be history or politics or physical geography. What we're seeing now is a number of the members have really integrated that into maps and actually into the curriculum, so that maps, in some cases, are part of the core curriculum for all of the major studies. And so maps just become, again, integrated, and I think that's the kind of the key thing for me, is integrating these data and information, and in this case maps just help amplify the understanding of that information, and it becomes a natural tool that the children use as just part of their educational experience.
Okay, excellent. Yes, Alina, would you have any views on that?
I was very surprised to see, for instance, when I started to present more my skills and helping schools here in the UK, especially on the geospatial side, for let's say acquiring more skills towards the geospatial. I've been nicely surprised to see that the national curriculum addresses the GIS skills from PS3, so from 10, 11 years old onwards. This is part of the curriculum, but it's not happening everywhere, and we see the discrepancy as well. We see the discrepancies when they go towards their education. And I've had, especially on the Women in Geospatial, which as well represent, I've had mentors from different parts of the world that still need more training in order to better understand particular skills and acquire more skills on technological side, on how to create better maps, how to better represent their data. And they were at master's level degree. And there is a discrepancy on how this is presented throughout the world as at the different countries. But then it comes as well on how we give more our time to do good, as Claire said, to use our capabilities, our time to do good and improve this side, because everything came as well. We've seen more training, we see more webinars there put on the platforms, and more children even here. I know Paul gave a lecture on how to create a map, and I was present at that, and I was really enjoying it. How to create a map, your simple map. But then we need to involve more. We need to involve more the public in, for instance, citizen science projects, in order for them to better acquire the skill and also understand better what how to represent the data, or how the data needs to be. Because we know OpenStreetMap is there, or Google Map as well, and they can contribute to those platforms as well. They can open the ArcGIS online account and contribute with the data there, but they need to have basic understanding in order to create good.
I think maybe, Alina, have you frozen there? Oh,
I think she has.
maybe having difficulty there. Okay, not to worry. I'm sure. Yes, Alina, are you back with us?
Or accurate. Yes, yes, I think you got my point indeed. So it is important to increase the access to education, to create good data, in order to as well have the products, especially those that will use further on the data to create good products. But involve more citizens, involve more public in this type of projects as citizen science projects.
Yes, interesting idea. That sort of more integration of people in sort of the creation of maps. And of course, we see the rise of the user as cartographer as well, don't we? The democratization of skills in mapping through software. Not completely, but obviously that may have had an impact. Yeah, definitely. Bill, what do you think about this then? About the role that cartography should play in education? Obviously, you've got a lot of experience in that. What do you think?
What do I think? I think that it does emphasize the importance of location through space and time, and also it does allow to simplify ideas. And what I mean by that is that, and I'm thinking that it's about, how can I put this? It's about the act of drawing. And I think that's something maybe we've forgotten, because I think the act of drawing realizes to us what we know and what we don't know, say about geography. And if I look back in the 70s, British geographer Belchin talked about there was the need to teach numeracy and literacy, and he termed his phrase graphicacy as well. And I'm not quite sure whether that's been followed up lately, but I do like the idea in education of having people draw what they know. And I look, say, in London at the Royal Academy, and also at Central St Martin's, at both institutes there is a professor of drawing. But nowadays, could we establish someone who was a professor of map drawing? But anyway, I think in education there's an importance of the doing part, of the drawing the map, either by hand or with some machine.
So what do you think it is about that process, just rather interestingly, about that process of drawing that is so special? Is it something about a connection that you form when you're drawing a map or creating a map digitally or by hand, do you think?
Was that to me, Alex? Sorry?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, just coming back to you on that point.
I've always thought that if I could, because I started off in the days of drawing with pen and ink and scribing, I always thought if I could have something that looked like a drawing board, but it was a large digitizing tablet and screen, and I could pick up something that felt like a rotring pen, and I could dial it up. If I wanted to be really precise, I would dial it up to be a 5H pencil, sharpened so that if it hit me, it would cut me. But if I wanted to do some very general concepts, I would dial it up to be a 6B, very fuzzy general outlines and so on. But as I drew, it took my artwork and it changed it either to be really accurate in the form of a topo map, but it kept it very casual if I was in more art. So I could dial up the art science end also of cartography. So when I drew, it could be very technically correct or very artistically correct. So I'm thinking, if I could just draw, I don't want to look at a screen and draw on this pseudo paper. I want to look down at what I'm drawing, not at a screen. So I think that if something came out where I could still draw and I can change the coarseness of the material I draw on, and also the pencil or the pen that I'm drawing with. It would change altogether how we might draw maps.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That reminds, I'll come to you in a minute, Claire, well, before I go off on one here, but that reminds me a little bit, of course, of these sort of two routes to perhaps communicating truth that there are with cartography. You know, you have something which is more impressionistic, artistic, which is your 6B pencil, if you like, these broad concepts to instantly communicate an impression of place. And then perhaps you've got your, as you call it, your 5H pencil, which is to do with the very precise location, scientific location of points on the ground and that sort of thing. So maybe that sort of, I don't know, those two pencils in a nutshell perhaps show that artistic science divide that we have in cartography, but the fact they're both pencils show that actually cartography unites the two maybe. Anyway, that's enough of my interlude. Right, Claire, what do you think about then this idea, the role of cartography in education? Is it worth it, or should we scrap it?
No, it's key. And the funny thing is, obviously, very great minds alike, great minds think alike, that I'd written down the art and science of map making, which was, you know, has been the British Cartographic strapline for many a year, maybe since '63, since it started, that it's the art and the science of putting that down on the paper. And that, I think, the role in education, cartography could be the link between the science and the art, that we range across all of these elements. So we have mathematics, we have statistics, we have cartography helping with that. We have our art, we have people creating amazing art in map form. I've recently been given a lot of Ordnance Survey maps by people in the local area that wanted to find somebody to recycle them. I went, yeah, I'll take them, because I don't want you to put them in landfill or anything, or recycle them. And somebody got in contact and said somebody at her school is creating artwork with maps, and could they have some? So I'm like, yeah, like, you know, I shirk a little bit because I know they're going to cut them up probably, but I'm just giving them like the ones that are torn already, being a heart cartographer. But, you know, they're interested in these things as well from the art side, and it goes right through, you know, traditionally I think we thought of cartography sitting in geography, and that's where I learned and started to love being a cartographer, through geography A level and physical geography at university. But it's so much wider than that across history. Obviously, you know, we've got our own British Cartographic Society historical mapping group that goes right across that area of education as well. So yeah, I think cartography is very unique in that way, that we have the unique ability to use the right hand side and the left hand side of our brain together to look at the science and the artistic side of it as well. And I think we should be able to touch every part of education and support their learning through using cartography and giving that gift to people to make maps to support the rest of their learning.
Yeah, indeed. And I guess, you know, some of the difficulty we have, of course, is communicating the relevance of cartography and that special skill that is cartography. So I think potentially then we should get on to the next question, which is about cartography. Since that you all seem to think, you all agree that it's worthwhile having cartography in education. I don't think anyone of you would disagree with that. Otherwise you'd probably get set upon by a large mob of angry cartographers from either the IMIA or the BCS, I think, in a dark corner. But thinking then about cartography itself, this is really curious. Again, this art, science, and maybe the technology side of it, which obviously is encompassed in our sense of or our constitution as a society of British Cartographic Society. What do you think then is distinctive about cartography as a form of data visualization? And please don't go for the easy answer like something like, well, it's to do with the earth. What is it, perhaps from your own experience, I think makes cartography distinctive as a form of data visualization? What about Claire? Why don't we go with you first on that one? What do you think?
Give me the really difficult one first. That's
Yeah,
fine.
that's
I think it's relatable. without going down saying that it's in reality, but everybody lives on this earth together. We've all got that in common, and so therefore I think when you're basing your visualization in a cartographic way, then people can relate to that as human beings to the space around them. So they know that, even if we're not talking necessarily about different scales, but, they get an idea, you can sort of tell a really large, globe or world map and then a small scale plan, and looking the difference between that. People understand that almost straight away. I don't, as far as I'm aware, I don't think there's much of a learning process in understanding the two different massive differences in scale like that, and therefore relating it to ourselves as humans, it's relatable, and you can start to see yourself in that world, in that visualization.
That's interesting. You think more so with cartography than other types of data visualization, the sort of strength of connection, maybe? Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, because I think just you can see yourself in that situation, you can relate to it more, whereas what other visualization, sort of like a graphical thing, it's quite abstract, and that's more difficult to relate to when something's more abstract like that. So that's where I was coming up with the
interesting. All right,
difference.
So Mark, do you have any reflections on that?
Yeah. Thanks, Alex. And I agree with Claire. I think my thoughts are I'm focusing on distinctive, right? So what is it that makes cartography distinctive? Because I think there's a lot of great data visualizations out there. I think they're bringing a lot of new thinking and in some ways just simplicity. And I'll come back to that in a minute, because I think that helps inform us in cartography. But I think what makes cartography distinctive is that we've got the location aspect. We're driving that information to Earth, to a location on the Earth. So, you said, you wanted us to be avoiding that, but I think that's important. Is cartography is placing that information, it's giving you context, spatial context for that information. And that is really what makes it distinctive from other data visualizations. I do think, if I flip that on its side, that as cartographers, we can learn from the data visualization folks, and we have been. We collaborated with the International Cartographic Association and had a cartographic summit a couple of years ago. We only had a third of the folks there from cartography on purpose, by design. We had a lot of design folks there, and we had a lot of data visualization folks there. There's been kind of three camps. We purposely did that to start to be thinking about how do we take some of the infographics type of thinking of simplifying the information and concentrating on the communication. And to me, I think cartography is about communicating information. So I think we can learn from that community and how do we simplify, and they certainly are complemented by cartography and being able to drive that information to a location for context.
Okay, thanks. I think perhaps also it's interesting, isn't it, the conventions maybe that we have in cartography perhaps set it apart perhaps a little bit as well. But yes, I like the way that you very very carefully trod a very safe line there when you were talking about location and so on, skating on thin ice. But yes, exactly. I think you're right. Of course, we could talk about mapping places without real locations and so on, but perhaps that connection with a location doesn't have to be real. It doesn't have to be something on the Earth. We could be mapping somewhere imaginary or on different planets or whatever, and still maybe there is a sense of that connection. Perhaps that connection with our imagination. Anyway, again, I've gone off on a waffle there. So, Bill, we better come to you before I start rambling on too much. What do you think it is then that's distinctive about cartography as a form of data visualization?
Okay. Well, what's already been said, we are dealing with geo, and we're always restricted by geo, but we're also restricted by the medium that we can publish with. We're restricted by the technology we've got access to and our users have got access to. And historically, I think we were restricted by brain-hand skills. But I think what makes cartography distinctive is that the cartographer is required to do two visualizations. One I'll spell with an S and one with a Z. because I think what we're required to do is produce a data visualization, the soft visualization, where we produce our mental map. We work out how we can visualize this data. And then what we do, we then work out a schema and apply technology to produce a data visualization with Z in order to transform our mental visualization into a physical visualization that someone else can see. So I think we're always involved in these two types of visualization, a mental visualization and a material visualization.
Interesting, again, sort of thinking about not just the art-science dualism, but also the role of technology and the technologies available, I guess, when we're thinking about the materials that we've got to create and communicate that sense of place or location. Yeah, very interesting. So, Alina, do you agree with your fellow panel members, or do you want to write something different?
I couldn't agree more, especially because Clare started mentioning as well that cartography is the art and science of map making, right? So, and how technically you are making the maps and how you're using them, but is the art combined with the science. And I would like, in fact, to just point out here, they're also my little ones' dresses, but there is a map, of course, is a new printed one, but is a representation from the visit of Her Majesty Elizabeth I in the city of Worcester in 1575. And when I saw this map, I just loved it. It is a different representation of the data at that time. And we always see, in fact, that how data is represented matters, how with a message that sends, and also is at that moment in time. And I consider that as soon as we have data that comes, we have all this information coming from statistics and so on, and we have to analyze them every day or every year. We issue new maps, new reports. When it comes to cartography, you have to put your skills to create a map that will stand in time, that will make that the user, the end user, to love it, to enjoy having it as a collection even. So that's why even we look as well how maps evolved as well through time, how cartography evolved through time and map making. And we start with Babylonians and how they created the maps on Mesopotamia, but then coming on today's date, how cartography is making now the maps. And there are so many beautiful skills still preserved, cartographers that love to do the map because of their beauty. They transmit to the population or to those who read and enjoy cartography. And I think this is something that makes cartography still going on, still outstanding, where geospatial side, data, those are really changing every day. You always have coronavirus, for instance, the date yesterday we had a different or much higher rate of incidents than today. So map changed throughout the night, where cartography will give you that beauty of the map.
Very interesting. I mean, I can't resist perhaps by taking that apart a little bit and saying, well, it seems like beauty then you would support as a real virtue in cartography, Alina, and obviously you've got a map behind you there that I think is exhibiting something of that sort of view. But just to you, this question, if that's true, then isn't there a bit of a dilemma if as a cartography you're mapping a subject which maybe isn't meant to communicate something that is inherently beautiful? So, for example, I mean, a type of map that I've seen that I talk about occasionally when you're looking at, let's say, for example, visitor maps of former concentration camps in Germany, and you know, we wouldn't necessarily say they're beautiful maps. They're meant to communicate a particular emotion, which is to do with maybe sadness and grief and so on. But you wouldn't really look at it and have it up on your wall. I don't have it up on my wall, probably for that reason. I don't want to come into my study and feel sad every time I come in. Maybe that happens anyway when I open my email. But generally, you know, do we really think that all maps should actually be inherently aesthetically pleasing? I wonder if you could just reflect on that for a minute, since you mentioned it.
Yes, thank you. In fact, your question exactly takes me as well to the cholera map, the most important one Jon Snow created in mid-century, 19th century. in fact, we should not just focus on feelings that are just for happiness and this beauty expression, but also to understand the message that map sends to us. And I think when it comes to Germany and even the other conflicts, World War First, right? The World War, the World War First, and the Second World War. Those maps from political side, from conflict side as well, transmit the emotion that the people at that time had to suffer, or to how to better say it, is that a map can also transmit the sad emotions. But that will give you the understanding how we better understand and how we better place ourselves in the society, right? And how we influence the environment we live. And if the cholera map of Jon Snow, in fact, was, you were seeing that all those dots, all those black houses in Soho, in fact, they were the death houses. People were dying in those houses. But that made you understand how quickly life was impacted. And these emotions as well, it is important. I think people are there that are enjoying having this type of maps, because they do have they do put forward how we as human I don't find the words now, but excuse me.
There's something
But
about our role in the world, isn't there?
Exactly. Is how we also better understand the impact on our environments, and if it's the war, the impact, the conflict, or for instance, this is when Her Majesty Elizabeth I arrived there, but also there are maps of attacks, right, from Middle Age, that they are still very cherished, because they represent that event. And it is important as well to see those maps. I'm coming from the Eastern Europe, and we had loads of conflicts with Ottoman Turks, Ottomans, and they were always attacking exactly where I was born. And for me, the maps at that area, exactly the south of Danube, between the Bulgaria and Romania, those maps are really nicely created, but they represent as well the conflict, how horses, for instance, being on the floor, or that's why I said that I don't like the red, but they are still representatives.
Yeah, thank you for that. Very interesting. I mean, it called to mind, is it Tolstoy, where he says something like, the purpose of art is to transfer emotion, or something like that. And you think that perhaps maybe maps have a bit of a role in that. And maybe there's a tendency to think that maps should always be, pretty, maybe. And that's not necessarily the case. There's a broad way in which we can articulate emotion through cartography, I think. Yeah, great. Okay, good. Well, we've talked enough about that particular topic. I think that's really very interesting. So what I want to maybe move on to now then is to think a little bit more about material questions, if you like. And I know Bill's already mentioned this a little bit, but very provocative question: is the paper map dead? I'm not sure what you think about that. Maybe Mark, we can go to you first from IMIA. I'm hoping you're not going to say yes, let's move on, and sort of draw the wrath of your members in IMIA.
No, not at all. No. This is a great question. It's actually one that we've been confronted with within the International Map Industry Association, and I think the answer is twofold. One of them is that we were concerned that there would be a decline in the use of paper maps, and in fact we have seen the number of our printers. We have printers as part of our association, have seen in some cases a decline, but not as dramatically as we thought. We're still seeing the need for it in business as well as in recreation, particularly. But I think more importantly, so there still is a need. That's the first part of my answer. There still is a need for the paper map, and we've seen that over time continue. The more importantly, though, is there's been many more opportunities. The map is just one representation of that geographic information. And so when you have a data-driven or a geographic information system-driven, you have the ability to create many different products. So we really can get to that mantra that we've been looking for of how do you create once and use many times. And the paper map is just one representation of that. Of course, there's the digital map data, but even beyond that, what we've seen is maps moving into various applications, into education, as you mentioned, into business, into the communication of information. And so what our members, the International Map Industry Association, has become much more diverse over the last decade or so, to the point where we had most of our folks, a lot of our folks were map publishers, and then they were map data publishers. They've evolved into app developers, and then really embedding that geographic information inside other information products, which are really becoming decision support products for business, and they're becoming embedded in other recreation opportunities. This was really driven home to me, and I'll just kind of close with this, but I took my kids to an International Map Industry Association conference, and I tried to give them some of the free maps, and they said, we don't need them. And I said, well, what do you mean? Because I'd sent them off to the city, we were in Washington, D.C. I'd sent them off. And I said, well, we've got our apps. They had the maps, but they weren't thinking of them as maps. They were just part of the app that they were using to go find a restaurant, the app that they were using to go find the point of interest, the app they were trying to find certain types of museums. Well, the maps were embedded in all of those apps. And I think that's really where we're going as an industry, is mapping is becoming, I don't want to say ubiquitous, I think that's been overused, but certainly integrated into many other different systems, and we just kind of expect the map. And I think that's a great place for us to be.
That's a very, very good point. It's so ubiquitous that if you suddenly took everything away, people would suddenly notice, I think, wouldn't they? What a very different world to 20 years ago, the end of the 90s, where people were sort of saying, oh, the future of cartography is dead and so on, when actually, obviously things are slightly different these days, which is good. Okay, so Alina, what do you think? Paper map is dead? You've got one on your wall, so I guess that means no, but surprise
that means no. There will still be people that will enjoy having these type of maps, but maybe as well there will be those that would like to have as in valued ones. So those are that authentic, and they will buy the paper map that is probably from that age, that period. They will go to auctions and so on. But new ones, creating now new paper maps, maybe it will be more on the case of the business side, how Mark said. But if we take it out, then people will understand the value. As well, when I'm talking about as well the space and how we better understand space, just take out space and you'll understand the value of how space underpins so much of our lives, daily activities. So it's as well about the map. If we take out the map from all the applications that, or all the businesses that want to have their store put on the map, so people to find it easier, network, to go there and come back, network analyst, then they will see that the maps are needed, but still the paper map per se is not anymore needed for people to go there and to take London straight on and go as a tourist and then go with a paper map, let's go on this or this road. They will go on the applications. And we have to make sure that the data they have on the applications are as cartographers is accurate data. Because paper map, if I'll publish now something on paper, then in a month or in a year it will change, then my paper again will become obsolete. And is the recycling process put in place, as an accurate put in place, or is it just going on the landfill? So we have to be very mindful.
Okay, indeed. I mean, it'd be good to explore a little bit what it is about paper that obviously people like so much. I mean, you can't smell a PDF very easily, or at least the last time I tried, nothing really happened. But for others, their experience might be different. But yes, indeed, there is something, obviously, from a sort of tactile aesthetic side of things that people love about a paper map. And sometimes I know when you get books, for example, and you send authors copies, whatever, it's always the hard copy that authors want. It's not really the electronic copy. They want something to have and to hold, sort of thing. So there is something about that, I think, about it. Claire, what do you think? Do you still going for paper maps, or do you think they should all be put on the bonfire? What do you think?
Yeah, well, over the last 16 months, it's actually been quite a change in steer with COVID and us all working from home. So we as a design team sitting within steer with our consultancy colleagues, we had the big plotters, we had the big A3 colour printers, and we'd be printing stuff off, we'd be putting it up on the wall, we'd be sharing ideas. All of a sudden, we were then all working from home, didn't have printers, and we were like, oh, this is quite a fundamental change to how we, as a design team, get together and share ideas and, look at a piece of work and develop it as a team. And so, going forward, we're moving offices soon. And, my key thing was, okay, where's the printer going to be? Are we going to have a printer still? How many printers are we going to have? We're all a bit panicky about it. Looking at technology solutions for it, having whiteboards and being able to share ideas in the design team like we did before by putting a piece of paper up on the wall and scribbling on it and talking about it. That we don't think that technology is going to have the same results at the moment. We've still yet to get back into the office altogether to get that back again, and it's something we really want to get back again, because we think that the junior members of the team that only started just before the lockdown and since as well have really missed out on that, all getting around a big plan of something, the teamwork and doing that. And there's nothing like just getting around a big piece of paper and being able to scribble on it and have your ideas written down in front of you, like William was saying before about drawing something. So yeah, I definitely don't think the paper map is dead. However, with eco-friendliness as well coming more on board, thinking about how much paper we print out and do we really need to have that as a resource, and then what we're doing with it afterwards, as Alina said, about recycling. But we've really reduced the amount of paper that we're using. I mean, I probably printed out, I did go into the office a few weeks ago because I had to print something out for the British Cartographic Society awards that I wanted to post out, and that's the first time I printed anything out in a year. And the amount of stuff that we were printing out is drastically changed. We are still producing paper maps though, so I'm on the 7th edition of the Swindon cycle map that we're producing for the town now. Since 2012 we've been producing that for them, and that still goes out to the professional printers to get printed, and she's seeing more uptake of people requesting that and being posted out to users. So it's a large format 3-fold 8x3 panel map that people, there's a high demand for, obviously getting out into the local area that people did during COVID as well.
Yes, of course.
And wanting to explore their local areas. So there's definitely a wish for that kind of product. But thinking about how that is sustainable going forward as well is a big thing. We want to get down to net zero and things like that as well. So yeah, I think with COVID as well, we've been able to push the technology a little bit more. A lot of things like this very interface has driven further, and I think us thinking more about how the technology can live up to what we need it to, then that's sort of come a long way as well. Yeah. And there's still lots more to do.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much, Alina. Yeah, it's interesting again that what you touched on there a little bit, the idea that COVID, of course, has caused a resurgence of people looking at their local area and then wanting to get maps of their local area and perhaps exploring. Paul there has made a comment about that. Has COVID had an impact? And I think yes, in terms of discovering their local area and so on. I mean, even Swindon. So there's hope for everyone, I think, in that dark corner of Wiltshire, which I'm sure Wiltshire plan to get rid of Swindon. Anyway, right. Bill, then perhaps you can give us some insights about what it is about paper maps. If you think that maybe they're not, shouldn't be consigned to the scrap heap. If you think there's something good about preserving them and using them, what is it about them?
Okay. Well, I'll start out with maybe wondering with the people involved today that who has on their wall or in their home an electronic piece of installation, interactive art that you can pay a lot of money for. And if I can move to mapping, who has an electronic map on their wall? And just recently, the journal that I co-edit with Dr. Anne Ruas, the International Journal of Cartography, we had a special issue called Cartographers Write About Cartography, where we had 26 cartographers wrote a free essay about a map that they liked. They chose it. And the age groups ranged right through the age spectrum, and they came from around the world. Of the 26 authors invited, all but 2 wrote about paper maps, something that they really liked, and only 2 wrote about electronic. So what I'm thinking is that I think historically that when someone's maybe walking in an unknown area or exploring their local area, that I think what the paper map gives someone is what I will call tactual reassurance. They've got in their hand something that doesn't give them any anxiety about lack of Wi-Fi or battery power. That you've got this thing in your hand, and unless it rains or I get lost and I'm so hungry that I eat the map, I've got this thing that'll get me back. And maybe the paper map is morphing into something else, and so maybe what we should be talking about is a hard copy map rather than a paper map, because I look at what, say, Samsung is now doing with their screens that fold up. You know, what happens when we've got a screen in our pocket that we can unfold into an A1 map and fold down into an A6 pocket map. And I think that maybe the paper map is morphing into a hard copy map, whatever that might be.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. That's very interesting. Again, those thoughts about what it is that gives people a sense of pleasure, or as you say, perhaps confidence. Certainly, if they're wayfinding, perhaps having something in their hand that they can hold and feel and so on gives them that reassurance, doesn't it? Beyond just looking at something maybe on a phone or something like that, or an app, and not thinking that it might suddenly go off or go out or go down because the battery is drained or something like that. So very, very interesting, I think. And one of the things that I love personally about paper maps, I think all maps are great, but paper maps I like especially the Times Atlas. In fact, I think I saw Jim here earlier, hopefully part of the group, so he'll know what I'm talking about. The fact that with the Times Atlas, it's so huge and massive that actually it's not portable. You have to put the thing down, sit down, be quiet, be still to read it. And actually, because of our modern way of life, if you like, we're always on phones looking at maps and moving around constantly. There's something about the Times Atlas that makes you sit down and just actually have a bit of almost meditation, if you like, away from the busy world. So there's something there, I think, about the actual cumbersome nature, if you like, of paper maps and atlases that makes us less portable or less movable. Somehow, and sometimes I think that can be a good thing. Right, so good. Okay, we've explored that. I think we've got time for a couple more questions, then we'll wrap things up. So thinking about cartography maybe a little bit more specifically, and what is good about perhaps cartography. What to you would you say is the essence of good cartography? What makes a good map? So we've already touched on this a little bit, Alina, there. You were talking about the sort of aesthetically pleasing aspects of map, but what would you say is the essence of good cartography, and perhaps why is it important?
It's a very good question.
It's a very good question indeed. And this takes me, in fact, as well to my first year of university, 2005, when my favorite science, and when I started to take this leap, because I was coming from history side, social, and I told my family that I want to go towards environmental and geographical studies. And they were like, "Why?" Because I really liked environment when I was very young, very little. But when I started my studies on cartography, I think cartography made me love as well mathematics. And I think the mathematics behind how accurate the data is represented, if the information you present there, I find it important. And that in fact takes me to addressing cartography, to address the rest of the sciences, the rest of the skills that are put into cartography as important. And that's something I will go with.
Okay, excellent. So that's a very interesting angle, I think, looking at the mathematical basis of cartography. We often forget that, actually, and the way that can create, obviously, accurate and good data. Yeah, fantastic. Mark, what do you think about this? The essence of good cartography, and why is it important? What do you think?
Yeah, I kind of mentioned it earlier. I think it's communication. So I think Alina's, I think Clare actually brought up earlier the art and science of cartography. Bill mentioned it also. Alina talked about the mathematics. That's the science part of the art and science. We certainly have the aesthetics, which we've talked about here, which is the art part, and also how you best communicate that. But in the end of the day, it's about communicating information, and I think it's the elements of both of those, communicating it very well in an aesthetically pleasing, but also in an accurate way. And again, that comes back to our earlier discussion, is that people trust maps, and we need to continue that and be able to represent that information accurately.
Yeah, okay. That makes perfect sense, I think. Now, what do you think then, Clare, about that? Are you going to come up with something slightly different, maybe?
Well, I've got it's a bit similar to Mark's, actually. Yeah. It's understanding the use.
Yeah.
So it's communicating it, like Mark said, but it's understanding the use in essence. So I'm currently producing some mapping for a rail network. And being in steer, I've got obviously the whole of the rail team at my disposal to go and talk to. And I'm the first one to put my hand up and go, yeah, I don't know all about these different rail networks and the flows and how they're impacting on the core route network and all these other things. And so the first thing I did before anything was to reach out to my colleagues who are the experts in that and say, look, we've got to present this thing to the client. I want to make sure that I really understand what they know already before I go and present. They want 5 samples of a map for a start, and then we're going to whittle it down to 2 and get this final overseeing map to explain the network changes. And I really want to understand how that network is going to be changing and what the client really wants to get out of it. I mean, obviously, in most cases, you probably go direct to the client then and ask them more questions. But I was like, look, I've got this expert panel that I work with. Let's get out some information from them first. Use our knowledge sharing, which is fantastic at Steer, to go up to directors and ask them for their advice. And especially when you get you get a person that loves map and a person that loves public transport, and they'll happily talk to you for hours and hours on it. So you have to be careful on Teams now. And sorry, I've lost connection. Yeah. So I'd say understanding the use is the key to making a good map.
Thanks. I think that's a really interesting point, isn't it? I think that whole idea of use and obviously where that fits into design and so on. And something I find very interesting, of course, is when we have awards in cartography, various organisations, BCS, the ICA, and so on. Obviously, it's very difficult to really test something like use. How useful a map is. So, criteria often sort of skewed by how the map maybe looks and so on, rather than thinking about how useful it is. So maybe it's very interesting, but underused or neglected part of trying to understand what makes maps good. So thank you for that. Yes, Mark, do you want to say something quickly before I pass on to Bill?
I do. I just wanted to jump on your mention of the awards, because actually this is a great opportunity for us to talk about the International Map Industry Association and the International Cartographic Association. We've been collaborating for about a decade. Bill Cartwright and I actually work together up at the UN level, at the United Nations Global Geospatial Information Management. And we work across a set of about 10 different professional organizations. And we came together in that and said, well, maybe there's ways we can collaborate. And so we started a collaboration with the International Cartographic Association and IMIA. One of the things that came out of that was the partnering with Esri and creating the ICA IMIA awards. So we actually, just this past week, have the Map Gallery Awards. So this is about 1,000 submissions that come through, and I'll put the link in. And about 1,000 submissions of people submitting their maps. And we have judges from the International Cartographic Association and the International Map Industry Association. And we have an Excellence in Cartography Award. So I just thought I'd point that out when you were talking about awards. It's a great opportunity for collaboration and also just recognizing good maps that communicate.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark. Yeah, I wonder how many of those maps will be used successfully. Let's see. Yeah, that's good. Okay, Bill, then, I think over to you for just to round off this particular question then, thinking about what the essence of good cartography is and why is that important?
Okay. If I can repeat myself, I think the essence of good cartography is what I call the beautiful lie of actually minimizing fake news, but also making the users aware that this is fake news. And what my example might be is there's that painting by Magritte, I think his name is, that he's got a painting of a pipe, and under it says, "This is not a pipe."
Yeah.
And maybe what we need to have on a map is say, "This is not the Earth," to let our users know that it's a representation of the Earth, but it's not a true representation. So how do we get that message across, and still have an effective communication device? And I think it's twofold: the need to design something that realizes the beautiful lie, but secondly, it leaves the user in no doubt that it is a representation of the Earth. It is not the Earth.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. I mean, it reminds me a little bit. I don't know if any of you remember, there was a couple of years ago, there were the wildfires in Australia, and there was the visualization that went around social media showing the fires sort of burning in Australia, and it was deliberately designed as a work of art rather than an accurate representation, but it got seen, of course, on social media as and sort of regarded as an accurate representation. And the artist, I think it was Anthony Hearsey, I think maybe Bill, you know a little bit more about this, had to issue a statement on his website saying, "Don't think of this as a map of visual, think of it as an image or something like that." I know, Bill, you know more about that than I do. But
I think it works two ways, Alex. You know, in a continent like ours, when those massive fires were burning all the way down the east coast, and there's a lot of them. It's like Europe was on fire from Great Britain to Bucharest. So how do you show that in a map? And I think that map did show that about half of Europe was on fire, and the devastation out of that. So I think sometimes that impact has to show what's on there. So I think even though it was actually not, it was dramatic, but it did show the real drama that was taking place.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. I don't know if Alina, you wanted to say something about that, but I mean, it is very interesting about communicating that idea and communicating the urgency of something, and how, to what extent you have to sort of bend sometimes that strict representation to get that particular message across. I mean, you might remember there was also that early COVID map that was the aircraft trails, whatever it was, the connections around the world. I think it was Southampton that produced this, and that was taken to mean this was how COVID was spreading, for example. And it met the public imagination, or captured it, in terms of this being a huge threat, basically, obviously also because those connections were in red, and that also communicated that sense of urgency. Alina, well, I think maybe you were about to say something about that. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. So, in fact, I've started and I mentioned that mathematics, the science behind it is important, as well the message that map transmits, but how fast we'll transmit that message, because in the end, we combine cartography with so many other aspects. We want to represent our impact in society. So about the wildfires in Australia, or floods in Germany, or all these events, hazardous events, and so on. Then how fast will we represent those data? And that as well comes into our ability to do them with all these programs. We have the geospatial platform, how we gather the data. So there are so many things in the background that in the end we have to transmit a message to the public accurately, in a timely manner, as in today, yesterday, sometimes it is important. But when it comes to cartography that people would like to have on their wall, will not be the COVID map, right? Will not be the map that is an awareness of a very impactful event. And they would like something beautiful. So we have to understand that cartography has a bit of layers on this, and how we'll represent the data, if it's the beautiful data, or if it's the awareness data, or if it's the actionable data.
But do you think, just going by what you said, Alina, do you think then it's acceptable to, as Bill says, to this idea of a beautiful lie, that all maps are fake in a way, that sort of thing? Do you think it's all right then to bend those rules of accuracy to communicate particular message? We talk about communication over the last few minutes and so on. If you want to communicate that message, and you're talking about accuracy and so on, there's a bit of tension there, isn't there?
Yes, indeed. I'm talking about accuracy because it is so important, and I've been dealing with the problems on the data so long. And in fact, when I started, because I completed my master's degree in data interoperability, and having data moved across platforms and see how easily they got distorted, and with the map projections and so on as well. But then it comes also on the accuracy, and how it is on ourselves, on the map maker representation. So is my interpretation. If I would like to address the message of the fires, or the biodiversity, which I'm active as well on, the threat there, then I will make that map to fully take that message. But maybe someone will say, I don't think that's true. I'm seeing the data here and it's not valid. I see that there are loads of trees, for instance, right? And we militate for planting more trees on the deforestation side. And we see the impact there, but still there are people that are saying, okay, but data is there. We see that there are loads of trees. There's not the problem. In fact, the ocean is the problem, and doesn't do more. It does give us the oxygen, but still there are a couple of points to be raised, and it comes down to the individual, to the map maker, how that person, how the cartographer is going to represent the data, what message would like to convey, and it might be, the representation might be wrong for some, but depending on who reads the information, what message they would like to take on from that map.
It's quite an interesting point, I think, in terms of that balance between message, conveying the message, and obviously, recording truth, if you like. I mean, we all know if you create a digital elevation model of let's say a mountain range or something like that, it looks very disappointing when you put it on the screen. You have to exaggerate the height to get something that matches your perception. So there's an interesting balance there, isn't there? I wonder, it'd be worth, I think, perhaps getting maybe Claire's and Mark's view on this one as well. I mean, Claire, what do you think about this idea of message versus truth, if you like, or accuracy? There's something about the impression and something about the accuracy of the underlying data. What do you think there?
Yeah,
Sacrifice one for the other?
I think a lot of these things, and when we're talking back on what makes cartography distinctive from other things as well, is coming back to being emotive. And I think that it's sort of come up quite a few times, or things around it and about the connection that we have with maps and everything. And it's like talking about the wildfires and that visualization, and it was to create an impact, to touch people's emotions, to use that map and that visualization to get people to think about it and to take it to heart, rather than it just being a table of information that we can't relate to. There's a program on at the moment that I watched the other day about memory, and talking about how we remember things by visuals, and to help you to like long-term memory, to visualize these things, it sticks in people's minds longer. And I think that's something that mapping does, that once people see that actually drawn down, or going back to, again, like Bill was saying about like actually somebody drawing it themselves, and they remember it better. And I think that's a key link with all of these essences, whether it's whether the data's accurate or not, or if there's more of the simplification that cartographers use to generalize this information and pick out what we need. It's about getting that message across in an emotive way to your user so they remember it, whether it's a simple thing from going from the legend to what's on the map and then remembering just that short piece of information from A to B there, or whether it's an emotive thing that you're trying to change their feelings about something more.
But I suppose the difficult, I'll let Mark in a minute on this, of course, as well, but I suppose one of the difficult things here, of course, is something else we've been talking about, is trust. And if we are advocating that it's fine to create dramatic maps just to get the message across, in other words, to amplify and exaggerate, right, then does that not actually erode not only trust in the map, but also trust in cartographers and in the authority of what goes on the page, given what we're trying to actually achieve? Otherwise, we then create perhaps a dichotomy. We say, well, actually, this is a map is a work of art, so we shouldn't treat it as something which is maybe accurate. We look at it to communicate purely a message, and maybe nothing perhaps more reliable than that. I don't know, Claire, do you want to come back on that quickly before I pass on to Mark, see what he thinks?
I think it goes down to, we've got to be careful with the power that we have in our hands, I guess, and about educating people that is the downfall of it if it goes too far, I suppose. I think we can. I think as experienced professionals in the cartographic world, then we know what our capability, what our responsibilities are to society and to our clients, or to the whoever we're producing these maps for, that we have a responsibility to not lie on these maps, to be truthful, but then also to use our skills as best we can. If that's creating an emotion to the users, then I think that's a good thing in my eyes, that person's going to remember that map then. There's a fine balance, but then I think
it's interesting, isn't it? The beautiful lies, as Bill called it. I like that one. Yeah, great. Mark, sorry, be very patient waiting. Well, you've sort of indulged me there with the odd interjection. No. Please, Mark, carry on. What do you think?
Yeah, no worries. I think Claire had a great answer there. Yeah. I think as cartographers, up until this point in time, we've had to be selective in what we're represented, and therefore we each have our own biases. We try and keep the bias out, I think, when we're trying to communicate the information accurately. But at the end of the day, up until now, we haven't been creating one-to-one cartographic products, so we've had to decide what goes in there. We've had to generalize the information. We've had to identify what's the most important and give a hierarchy in the cartography to what we're representing. So we've had to be selective, and there is some bias in that. I think we've all tried to be as accurate as possible in that process. things are changing now. We're at this pivotal point in history now where we truly can start to create these digital twins, which we really can create a representation of a one-to-one in the world. And I think that's even more incumbent on us as cartographers now to make sure that we're accurately representing that information in a digital world. With the geographic information system, we can have not only the visual aspect, but all of the attribute information and all of the data that goes with that and enriches that information. So it's not just a representation, but it starts to become, we're bringing in models and being able to model the information. We're being able to bring in, advanced technologies like artificial intelligence to actually be able to do these things much more quickly. So I think as we move into this digital world, it's incumbent on us to accurately represent and model that information and attribute that information. It's a new world here. It's exciting. We've got new opportunities and new technology at our hands, but it's also a responsibility for us as cartographers.
Excellent. Yes, thanks. I think that whole sort of ethical dimension is something that's perhaps people are becoming much more aware of now, because obviously the skills that people can learn in terms of making maps attractive, dramatic, however we want to put it, that's much more possible, if you like, much more accessible. It's in the realms of possibility for many more people. It's more about these days, I think, as a professional cartographer, how you exercise your professional standards in terms of ethics, perhaps. I mean, that's maybe a debate for another day, but I think certainly it's very interesting to see that emerge. Alina, I noticed you put your hand up there. Did you want to say something about AI or something related to that?
Exactly. Mark touched on the point I'm very passionate about, especially on artificial intelligence and machine learning. And we see as well the tools we use as cartographers are changing. And we have to integrate. It is, in fact, a must. We need to integrate cartography as well with the rest of the emerging sciences and the emerging digital developments, which is artificial intelligence. And when we look towards digital twin and digital earth, we need accuracy. We need accuracy as the point of really there has to be, because if we are going to use these models to take decisions, to simulate events, to have all these simulations created and then try to understand how processes are going to impact our processes, are going to impact our communities, environment, and so on, then it comes down to how we integrate the data into the digital models, into the digital twins. And if we miss on the input, that is garbage in, garbage out. Yes, so the output will be obsolete. We can't use it. Then therefore, we have to start on an agreement, on a clear agreement that the data that is going to be integrated in the geospatial information systems is accurate. And accuracy is something we have to always advocate for and try to train people on the importance of it. If we are going to exaggerate on the message we are going to convey on the paper map or on the display on something that is going to be put on a wall for those, for instance, let's have A1 on the tube, right? That can be exaggerated, but the data behind, so artistically can be in order to take that message stronger, to make it stronger, but the data that is going to be integrated there or integrated into the models, it has to be accurate. So it's a bit of a better line on definition there.
Interesting.
Mark.
Yeah. There's always
not too much.
I apologize. I put my hand up
Mark,
too quickly. But just to illustrate Alina's point, I just put something into the chat, the Q&A. But we have the living atlas of the world, which was made up of maps, and we've talked about that's really evolved into apps, and it's got, of course, data layers. But to Alina's point, we now have AI and machine learning models on there. And so that's becoming another aspect of the geospatial tools that we have to communicate this information accurately, as Alina said. So sorry, I didn't want to miss that opportunity to give an illustration of what she was talking about.
Thanks very much. I mean, it is interesting, the whole dimension of AI. And of course, the question could be asked about whether human cartographers are ever going to be redundant, if you like, if really we have AI cartography. I don't know quickly whatever any of you might think about that idea. Do you think there'll always be a need for human cartographers, or is AI going to take over in some sort of dystopian Terminator-esque landscape? What do you think? If he wants to say, yeah, Mark, go for it. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think this has been, a colleague of mine has been actively writing a blog about this. There's a place for the AI and machine learning. It accelerates us being able to find the information we need and be able to apply it. But it's most powerful in what is called the human machine interface. It's that collaboration together. It's that, when you take the heavy lifting of sifting through all of this plethora of information that we're being rained on, and you take that away, it allows the cartographer, the geospatial analyst, more time to focus on the important things. We saw this with the automation of cartography. It took some of the mundane, tedious aspects, as Bill was mentioning, scribing and using pencils. We took that out and gave them additional tools. We automated the process so the cartographer could focus on the important things. And I think we're seeing that same thing with AI and machine learning. And it took a while for automated cartography, data-driven cartography, to really get to the point where it was, 60%, then 70%, all the way up to, 99% accurate. And I think we're going to see that process with AI and machine learning. So it's take out that mundane and allow the cartographers to focus on the important things.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, sort of delegation of tasks. Bill, do you want to come in and say something?
If I can make just one comment, I think that that cartographers like to draw. They like to create, and I think they might feel a bit disenfranchised if some of that was taken away from them. So with machine learning and so on, yes, it can actually modify it, etc., etc., etc. But I draw a parallel to early days when, to make computer mapping work, you had to sit down there and write code. And it drove me crazy spending a week trying to find that I left a full stop out or something. And I gave it away. It drove me crazy. And the real danger is, I think that people who are creative like to create. And if you take away that creative part and let this machine learning do it, those people who are innovative and think differently will move away from doing it. It doesn't interest them if they can't be creative, if they can't think differently. They don't want a machine to do it for them. And so I think we need to get some sort of compromise where maybe the rules are laid down by people who are creative.
Okay, very interesting. Claire, do you have a view on that?
I don't think I can add anything more.
No, we've pretty much.
I think, the creative side.
Don't feel you're going to be replaced like all of us one day with with the machine making decisions.
Well, I mean, the thing I was thinking about the future of cartography was about augmented reality. We've seen so much lately with technology and it being changed to be bespoke to the user, and how that element of things could sort of add to AI and creating from there. But I think you still need to understand, well, I suppose with machine learning it might change, but somebody still needs to interpret that data at the moment. Machine learning maybe not in the future, but I don't think I'm that far ahead to get my head around kind of what the like 50, 100 years time, what it might be like. But I can see at the moment, the benefit and the technology moving with augmented reality and how that will add to what we've got already. But I still think there's a lot of human, responsibility in there still at the moment to understand to understand what's going on, to deliver then more.
Yeah,
Alex,
sorry, Bill. Yes.
So I'm. Back in the 1970s, there was a book written by Arthur Haley called Wheels, and he talked about the auto industry in the USA. He was trying to develop a new car. At the very end of the book, when he's a complete failure and loses everything, he speculates on what the future of the automobile might be, the industry. And he speculates that it might be this all-doing, all-seeing, does-anything vehicle. And if I draw a parallel to that, I'd say that's what the RV became, of something that Haley speculated in his book in the 1970s. But maybe what we're heading for is what maybe the all-purpose map that we can, the user or we as the designer can modify it, will it, does anything, it works and whatever. Maybe years ago, we tried to force the topographic map into doing this for us. But I see with new technology and maybe applying machine learning that this thing morphs and modifies into something that we can actually use for this purpose here, right now. And it's something like the RV of mapping.
Very interesting. Yeah, I suppose that leads very nicely into perhaps thinking about what the future might hold, of course, and what the future of cartography might look like. And obviously, we're touching on the subject really of machine learning and AI and so on, and this idea of maybe, as Bill is talking about, the sort of all-purpose map, maybe total cartography or something, as I sort of think of it, that idea that maybe there's that sense of location that you have, and then however that is communicated could be reproduced in all sorts of different ways very easily to all different users, perhaps with different types of purposes, given that that information may already be there, and perhaps using AI to drill down to actually extract the more salient characteristics might be the sort of cartography we're looking for. Just to sort of, while you sort of pause maybe and think about the future of cartography, Jim Goldsmith from Ordnance Survey has asked, what's the biggest challenge for AI mapping, do you think? Does anyone want to come back on that? What they think the biggest challenge might be for AI mapping? Maybe designing a map that someone can actually read. I don't know. That might be might be an answer. What do you think, Mark?
Yeah, I think some of the challenges we've talked about cartography come in with AI and machine learning. How do you make sure you try and be as accurate as possible and not introduce your own bias? So that comes down to the training models and continually refining and training, and that's the power of machine learning and AI, is you can constantly be revising and doing the training. And we have to be looking towards how do we get the bias out of it and get increased accuracy. And I think that's the challenge right now. So that's a great question from Ordnance Survey.
Okay, excellent. Fine. So in terms then, because we're coming to the end of this really exciting session, it's been really, really good. Some fantastic answers from all of you. In terms of thinking about the future, I know we touched on it a little bit, but I wonder what your thoughts might be for the future of cartography. I mean, Claire, do you want to kick off with that as we sort of round off with some overall thoughts? Future of cartography, what do you think?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. I think thinking about cartography more in a bespoke way for the users, I think that's with the technology, obviously the increased availability of the technology and the different platforms that we have available to us. And again, touching on augmented reality and thinking about how users will be able to, in the future, I think, pick more about what they want to see. So it's going to be less on the cartographer maybe as the author and more on the user as the author of that map. And I think there are, there's certain elements of that already available, but yeah, that sort of targeted difference and probably us losing control a little bit of what the final output might actually look like and what the users can create themselves based on the stuff that the bed that we create, and then they can build on top of that and pick out the things that they want. I think that's maybe something that going forward is something that we need to think about more.
So sort of greater diversity of maps, mapping, map makers, map users, all of that. Perhaps, we tend to see maps that are one size fits all. We don't see many maps designed for a specific type of user, sort of partially sighted people, for example. We don't maybe see that so much, or very young people. It's very interesting. Yeah. So diversity of users. Yeah, I think that's certainly a good point. Alina, what do you think then in terms of maybe a little bit of crystal ball gazing? What do you think about the future? it's a tricky thing to talk about, but yeah.
Yes, it is a tricky subject. I will tell you a bit of the project I gave my students in China this morning to visualize AI in 1,000 years. and everyone received a particular area, and they have by tomorrow evening to create 1,000 report of how they will imagine AI being integrated in such and such sectors and industries. But AI doesn't have that history as cartography has, as millennia, right? Cartography is here for such a long time with deep roots in our development, in our societal development. We used cartography, map making for such long time, and cartography evolved, I would say, yes. So in fact, we all agree that evolved throughout the time, from clay mapping to then papyrus and so on, or skin, animal skin. Now we go towards digital. It is important to understand and also to put our minds, everyone's, into coming up with an understanding how now cartography, geography will go towards a new evolution, a new step in its evolution, because it's still here to stay. The data that we put towards GIS, towards all these platforms, is put by us, but AI is going to be trained still by us. And I totally agree with Mark that we have to be very, very careful on the biased information. But we also have to consider the new technology that's there. And we have the satellites. They are not just only satellites that scan and send the data and someone else will look in the data. But now we progress towards having data already pre-assessed, data extracted, the meaningful information being extracted as it is scanned on the satellite, not being sent, and they're going to send the data already prepared down to ground stations. So we are going to see maybe products being already developed on the satellites, on the drones, aerial photography as well. But it comes down to us, how we prepare, how we embrace the new technology, and how we make the evolution of cartography moving on throughout, let's say, 100 years, next 100 years. And comes down to how we collaborate. If we don't address the collaboration between ourselves, if we don't communicate, for instance, if we don't bring everyone on the table, as well the African countries, as well the Asian countries, as well Latin American countries, down to the table and discuss the subject, then we create a bias, because we cannot discuss the data for them with our understanding from Britain or from Europe. So it is important for global problem to address global collaboration. And I see cartography having another evolution. I still see cartography being embraced in so many applications and sciences. We look in the human geography, we look into the politics, we still have conflicts. We still see, for instance, Japan, Taiwan, China, and Middle East with conflicts. And then everything that happens around our society changes from day to day. And cartography has to capture this, creates map accuracy, meaningful information has to be put forward to those that decide in the end and make the decision maker, are the decision makers. And that's my point. We hope to see cartography being still there.
Well, indeed, very fascinating. Of course, cartography, it seems, inherently involves selection, of course. So selection necessarily involves politics. There's obviously a politics of selection. So, and I really like this idea of envisaging 1,000 years ahead. I mean, the interesting, wouldn't it, to say, well, what do the maps of 1,000 years look like? To come up with that, perhaps there'll be clay tablets. Who knows? Back again. Okay, thank you for that, Alina. So maybe then let's just move to Mark and then Bill on this concept of the future. I know some of you, well, both of you actually talked on it a little bit, but what perhaps do you see as a future for cartography?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that, Alex. I think there's two concepts here. One of them I've mentioned already, the integration of maps and cartography into many different systems, not only with the data, but also in things that you see maps and the spatial data and the statistical data all being merged together into things like intelligent agriculture systems. You see them in AEC, agriculture, architecture, engineering, and construction. We're seeing this the digital twin there. We're seeing it integrated into business intelligence systems. Front office, back office, all of this integration of information. And the second part of that is, well, that takes partnerships, and that means working together across traditional industry lines to blur those lines and bring the geospatial aspect into these other industries and business sectors. And I'll finish off with the importance of partnerships. I mentioned the International Cartographic Association. I was meant to use that as an introduction into the partnership, and I just put it into the Q&A window, the link to the partnership with the British Cartographic Society and the International Map Industry Association. Again, reaching across those lines. And this is the second joint event that we've done, and we appreciate that. So I just want to say thank you for allowing the International Map Industry Association to be part of this, and we look forward, and there's a link there, you can find more about the International Map Industry Association, and we look forward to this partnership. So thank you, Alex. Thank you to BCS.
Thanks very much indeed for those views on the future. Very positive. Thank you, Mark. Yeah, so Bill, over to you then.
Okay, thanks, Alex. I'm thinking something like Back to the Future, because I look quite fondly on what I call this. There was a decade, I think, of innovation in mapping between about 1985 and 1995 that began with interactive video discs, the Aspen movie map and the British Doomsday video disc. It then moved into the CD-ROM era and ended that decade with the World Wide Web. And I see some of the things that came out of that decade changed altogether the way in which we communicate information, including geo-information. So my first question I'll put is that what are we looking at after the web? What's the next thing after the web that we're looking at? Because I look at that decade that finished in 1995, ended with the web. We're still there. During that one decade, we moved from interactive video disc, analog interactive, to CD-ROM digital interactive, to the web distributed interactive. And we're still stuck there. So what's after the web? So we've been stuck there since 1995. We've been stuck there since whatever that is, 30 years almost. We've been stuck. So my question is, first of all, to think about what is after the web. What are we going to do? And linking to what I talked about before, I think that maybe Back to the Future is that it's something that looks like a paper map, feels like a paper map, but it's digital, it's connected, it's locatable, and it's malleable. We can actually move it into anything we want. So maybe you need to think something Back to the Future. But I'm also concerned that we're not thinking enough about what's the next medium we want to investigate after the web.
Okay, yeah, very, very interesting. Thank you very much indeed for that, Bill. And I think it's also very interesting that what you've brought to that sort of quartet of views, if you like, is the idea of material, thinking about what those materials might be of the future that we use. And of course, as you're also talking, well, we look at some of the advances in technology. Of course, the fact that we're able to have this discussion online now, obviously Bill being in Australia, Mark in the US, and then obviously Alina and Clare in the UK. I mean, that's quite something in terms of moving that technology forward and what we're able to obviously do in terms of communication with one another. So I think that's a very, very good thing. And the fact that, of course, as cartographers, we want to talk to one another and share and obviously develop our experience and our expertise and our knowledge together. So I think something that will continue, hopefully, will be that sharing of ideas and the desire to kind of work more closely together. I think that's a really key thing. So what I would want to do before I thank you really is just say I found it very, very interesting what we've been talking about. Very fascinating discussion and debate. Lots of really rich views that have enhanced, I'm sure, my understanding as well as everyone else's on these very good topics. I think what we've picked up on, especially key elements of cartography, this very interesting art-science dualism that we talk about, and the relative value that brings. So not necessarily a weakness, like some people say, but actually a value in those two different approaches and what they can bring. The idea that cartography integrates that with technology and materials. And obviously, as those materials and technologies develop, so does our art and science to really keep up with that, I think, in how we communicate. Communication, it seems, is still very, very important to what we do as cartographers. And whether we subscribe to that communication paradigm or not, which really started off in the sort of post-war era, actually communication seems to be very core to what we're talking about. We want to naturally, as humans, I think, communicate to one another. Maps are a very immediate medium for doing that, and how the technology is developed that enables us to do that, I think, are going to be key. But connections and communication will, I think, always still be there. In that communication, we also talked about, obviously, the balance between lies and truth that characterizes maps. See, my seagulls are having a go in the middle of all of this, so I say mine, but there we go. They're a protected species, so I can't take a shotgun out and shoot them, but you didn't really say that. So yes, this balance between lies and truth, which is very, very important, I think, for cartography. And that will always be there, because selection always involves politics, if you like, and aesthetics. And something we've seen maybe more recently is the rise of ethical questions in cartography. Over the last at least 30 years, maybe we've seen that, particularly accelerating maybe with COVID, and of course COVID dashboards, and maybe the way that some of those maps have been created to deliberately mislead and so on. So that's very much going to be there, I think, as part of the future. But I think what has been brilliant today is the way that we've really brought together these different perspectives, from obviously not just geographical perspectives, but also from industry and academia, to really try and understand these questions, which are quite deep searching questions in a way. And I think that's been a very enriching experience. And I think it's very interesting that there is broad agreement on so much of that, given the difference in perspectives we've got. So I'm going to say thank you ever so much indeed to all our panel, to obviously Alina, Clare, Bill and Mark. Thank you very much for joining us and taking part. It's been fantastic. Thank you to the IMIA, of course, and to the BCS for allowing us to do this and inviting me to host it. And I'm going to hand back to Paul, who's miraculously appeared to, I think, send everyone on their way.
Thanks, Alex. You've done most of the closing for me, but wow, what a great 2 hours. Some truly great questions and some really interesting personal perspectives from all of our panelists. So it just really leaves me to firstly thank Alex for being an absolutely amazing host. It's not an easy thing to do, and Alex really kept the conversation flowing and was great at recapping some of the really interesting points made. So a big thank you to you, Alex.
You're welcome.
But also a huge thank you to our 4 panelists. Bill, I'm sure you just want to sign off and get to bed now, as I know now it's 2 o'clock in the morning over in Australia, so I'm not going to keep you for much longer. Mark, I know you're keen probably to start your working day, and I'm sure the rest of us are just keen to close this conversation so we can all have something to eat and perhaps a drink. So all it leaves me to say is thank you again to everyone for being part. Thank you for all of you for attending and being part of this event. We are recording it, so as soon as it's edited, we'll add it to our YouTube channel, so you'll be able to access it again. And perhaps we'll include as part of that some of the links to some of the maps and that people have shared throughout the session. Keep an eye out on the BCS and the IMIA website and social media channels for future events coming up too, including the BCS conference, which is happening on September the 8th and 9th. So thank you again to everyone involved. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you soon at another BCS event or BCS/IMIA event. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much.